I met him when I was just 13. Back then, I didn't even know what love meant. But something about Ethan's presence, the way he walked, spoke, laughed, it all felt like sunlight I couldn't look at for too long. From that day on, he lived in a part of me no one else could reach. Even when I didn't know what that space was for, it belonged to him. Ethan was 2 years older, always a step ahead, always walking through life like he didn't need anyone's permission to exist. Meanwhile, I was the quiet girl, the invisible one, the one who admired him from just beyond the edge of his world. We weren't close. Not then. But I watched him. At school, during clubs, at festivals. He was the type that people naturally gathered around, the type who laughed easily and made others feel like they were worth something just by standing near him. That smile? I memorized it. I thought, if I could just stay near enough, maybe one day he'd look back at me, really look. Maybe he'd see that someone had been silently loving him for years. And so I stayed. Through high school. Through university. Through every party where he never noticed I was there. Through every time he ruffled my hair and called me kid. I stayed when he got a girlfriend. And then another. And then another. And each time I told myself it didn't matter. He was still young. We both were. Love just hadn't arrived yet. When it did, it would be mine. In our final year of university, things changed. Not because Ethan finally noticed me, but because I finally had enough. We were at a New Year's party. Ethan was there, of course, with his latest girlfriend, a pretty sharp-tongued girl named Chelsea. I was watching from across the room when I saw her slap him. Right there, in front of everyone. A hush fell over the group, music still playing in the background like it hadn't noticed the violence. Chelsea screamed something about betrayal, about lies, and stormed out. Ethan stood there, stunned, red-faced, humiliated. I moved before I even thought about it. I crossed the room, took his hand, and pulled him away from the crowd. We sat outside on the cold concrete steps while the wind picked at our clothes. He didn't say anything. So I handed him a cup of warm tea I had brought with me earlier. He took it and for the first time really looked at me. "Thanks, Leah," he said. Leah. Not kid. That was the moment I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe he'll finally see. The next few weeks we got closer. He'd text me at night, ask how my classes were going. We went out for coffee once, then twice. He was always relaxed around me, unfiltered. I knew his favorite ramen spot. I knew he hated rainy days. I knew he liked to sketch when no one was watching. It was so easy to be near him. Too easy. I thought. Maybe I'm the one he's been waiting for all along. But I never said it. Not out loud. I was always too afraid of ruining what little space I had in his life. So I kept giving. Gifts. Time. Energy. I helped him study. Brought him soup when he was sick. Laughed at his jokes even when I didn't understand them. Everyone said I was a fool. That I was wasting my time. That he was never going to return my feelings. But I didn't listen. Because I believed that love, real love, could be earned if I was just patient enough. 10 years. That's how long I carried this feeling. Until one day he gave me a box. I thought it was a gift. Maybe a necklace. Or a bracelet. Something to show me he had finally noticed everything I'd given. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside was an invitation to his engagement party. He was marrying someone else. A woman he had met at work. Someone I'd never even heard of before. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said, looking nervous. "You're one of my oldest friends, Leah. I hope you'll come." Oldest friend. That was all I had ever been to him. I stared at the box in my lap and felt my entire world fold in half. He thought I would smile. He thought I would congratulate him. But I couldn't. So I closed the box, stood up, and gave him a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks," I said. "But I won't be coming." And I walked away. For the first time in 10 years, I walked away. The next morning, I gathered every single thing that had his fingerprints on it. The mug he gave me in our second year of university with late-night study buddy written across it. The sweatshirt I borrowed once when I got soaked in the rain and never returned. The sketchbook he left at my place during a group project and told me to just keep. Even the small things. A keychain from our trip to the coast. A ticket stub from the movie he didn't remember we watched together. Birthday cards with inside jokes only I still laughed at. All of it went into a brown paper box. Neat. Quiet. Final. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about bitterness. I just needed the weight to be gone. People always talk about heartbreak like a sudden explosion, a loud, shattering thing. But mine was slow, a quiet unraveling, like thread being pulled from a sweater until you're left holding nothing but loose fabric and years of warmth you can't wear anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't have tears left for a man who never gave me the chance to love him out loud. Instead, I put on a clean shirt, slipped on shoes that didn't squeak, and walked to his building. The doorman looked surprised to see me. He buzzed me in without a word. I waited outside his apartment door, box in hand, counting the seconds between each breath. When he opened the door, Ethan looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes widened. "Leah." "I won't take long," I said. He looked down at the box. "What's this?" "Everything I should have let go of years ago." He stared. Didn't move. I handed it to him. He didn't take it. "Leah, why are you doing this?" I almost laughed. Because wasn't it obvious? But I kept my voice level. Because I've been in love with you for 10 years. And you're marrying someone else. His mouth opened, but I kept going. I waited for you to see me. Really see me. And you never did. You don't have to apologize. I don't need that. I just need to leave without pieces of you still in my room. Finally, he took the box. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But that doesn't mean you didn't." I turned to leave, but then paused. "I hope she makes you happy, Ethan." He blinked. "I hope you find someone who looks at you the way you looked at me all these years." That almost broke me. But instead of saying what I was really thinking, that I had never wanted someone, I had only wanted him, I smiled. "Maybe I will." And I walked away again. This time lighter. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked until the city started to feel unfamiliar. Until the streets no longer reminded me of waiting. At some point, I found myself in front of a bookstore cafe we used to visit as a group. I stepped inside. The place hadn't changed. Still smelled like cinnamon and secondhand pages. Still had those same wobbly tables and mismatched chairs. I ordered a drink and sat by the window. Outside, couples walked by holding hands. Teenagers laughed over their phones. Someone was playing a violin at the corner, the kind of sad tune that made you feel like you were in a movie scene. And maybe I was. Maybe this was the part where the girl finally stopped chasing. Finally stopped hoping. Maybe this was the start of something else. Not a new love. Not yet. But a new silence. A better one. When I got back to my apartment that night, I felt the difference immediately. There was no weight pressing on my chest. No ache in my arms from carrying someone who never asked to be held. Just space. Room to become someone who didn't need to be chosen. To feel complete. The days that followed were strange. Not painful exactly, just unfamiliar. Like learning to write with your other hand. Every motion clumsy. Every silence louder than it used to be. I thought I would miss him more. But what I missed wasn't Ethan. It was the version of myself that had hope. The girl who believed that loyalty could one day turn into love. She had packed up and left with that brown box. And now all that remained was someone. Relearning how to live. Without orbiting someone else's sun. 2 days later, I turned off my phone. Not for drama. Just for rest. I didn't want to wake up and wonder if he texted. Didn't want to check if he saw my story. Didn't want my worth measured by his attention anymore. Instead, I took long walks without music. Bought groceries in peace. Ate lunch at the counter with sunlight touching my face like it hadn't noticed I existed before. And for the first time in years, I didn't rehearse imaginary conversations in my head. I didn't write replies to messages I never got. I just existed. On the 5th morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Zhao, knocked on my door. She was in her 60s, soft-spoken, always wearing the same beige shawl. "I saw a man waiting outside yesterday," she said gently. I blinked. Tall. Fair. Looked a bit lost, she added. "Ethan." "Of course." "He left after a while. Didn't knock." "Thank you," I replied, my heart a little tighter. I closed the door and stood there, staring at the silence. He came. But I didn't know why. Was it guilt? Regret? Habit? Did he come to return something? To apologize? To ask me to stay in his life as a friend? I never found out. Because he never tried again. And I didn't chase him. That afternoon I wrote a letter. To myself. Dear Leah, you did your best. You loved deeply. You stayed longer than you should have, not because you were weak but because your heart was full. But it's okay to leave now. Not for him. For you. Because you deserve a love that doesn't require waiting rooms and second places. You deserve someone who knows. Not eventually, but immediately. I folded the letter and placed it in a journal I hadn't opened since college. The one Ethan once doodled in. Then I took out a suitcase. Not a metaphorical one. A real one. I packed lightly. Few clothes. My sketch pad. My paints. A pair of headphones. A scarf my grandmother gave me. No makeup. No photos. No mementos of a decade spent in shadows. I didn't know exactly where I was going. Only that it wouldn't be somewhere he might run into me again. By the time I got to the train station, the air smelled like a different season. Late autumn. Crisp. Emptying. I bought a ticket to a coastal town I had once visited as a child. No plans. No expectations. Just distance. When I boarded the train, I found my seat and settled by the window. As it began to move, I didn't look back. Not at the city. Not at the station. Not at the version of myself still waiting there with open hands. I looked ahead. And I smiled. Because for the first time since I was 13 years old, Ethan Blake was no longer the future I was waiting for. The town I chose wasn't anything special. It didn't have famous landmarks or grand cafes. Just winding streets, sleepy bookstores, and a sea that sighed louder than the people ever did. It was exactly what I needed. A place where no one knew who I used to be. No one had heard of Ethan Blake. No one called me the girl who waited. No one looked at me with pity or with questions in their eyes. Just strangers. And silence. And that felt like freedom. The first week I did nothing but walk. I walked past fishermen arguing about waves. Past schoolchildren racing down alleys with seaweed in their hair. Past quiet houses with clotheslines full of color and no secrets. Each step felt like shedding a memory. By the 5th day, I found a small studio tucked between a laundromat and a fruit stall. The sign said, shared space. Monthly rent. Warm light included. I stepped inside. It smelled like turpentine and old paper. An older woman with ink-stained hands greeted me. She asked if I painted. I used to, I said. Then start again, she smiled. And just like that, I rented the corner by the window. I bought new brushes that night. Canvas. Charcoal. A sketch pad that didn't carry memories. I didn't paint Ethan. Didn't sketch his silhouette or draw the lines of his smile. Instead, I painted the sea. Over and over. Stormy. Calm. Gray. Blue. Sometimes still. Sometimes violent. It was everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel. The days stretched softly. Sunrises bled into afternoons. I forgot what day it was more often than not. I started to speak to myself out loud again. Not in grief. In company. It was odd how little I missed him. I thought letting go of Ethan would feel like losing a limb, but it was more like shedding old skin. Uncomfortable, raw at first. But then new. The shop owners began to remember my name. I became the girl who paints by the window. They didn't ask about my past. They didn't care. They just waved when I passed. Offered me extra rice. Kept my favorite tea stocked. I was rebuilding. Not a life with anyone. Just a life for me. One rainy evening, I was walking back to my room when a man approached me outside a bookstore. He was tall. Wore a brown coat. Had paint on his fingertips. You're the one who painted the Red Sea in the studio window, right? I nodded. It stopped me in my tracks, he said. I've never seen the sea look angry in such a beautiful way. I smiled. Maybe the sea has more feelings than we think. He grinned. I'm David. I run the bookshop upstairs. If you ever want to paint silence, come visit. It wasn't a pickup line. Just an offer of space. The kind I wasn't used to. The kind that didn't come with expectations. That night, I didn't think about Ethan. Not once. Not even when I replayed the sound of David's voice in my head, wondering what his story was. Because for the first time, I wasn't comparing. Wasn't measuring every man against the one I couldn't have. I was just curious. Not about love. About connection. And that felt like progress. The next day, I brought a sketch pad to David's shop. He had a corner seat saved. Black coffee already poured. He didn't ask about the past. Just let me draw while he sorted shelves and hummed along to jazz. The silence was warm. And as the rain tapped against the window, I realized something. Maybe the goal was never to be chosen by someone else. Maybe the goal was to choose myself fully, and let whoever's meant to join that quiet arrive on their own. Without begging. Without chasing. Without asking them to look. That night I painted again. But this time not the sea. I painted a girl standing by the water, her back turned, arms stretched open to the wind. She wasn't reaching for anyone. And yet she looked free. And she looked like me. The painting of the girl by the sea was finished, but I didn't hang it in the studio. I wrapped it carefully in soft linen, placed it in the corner of my room, and faced it away from the door. Felt too personal to share. Too honest. Too final. Like a quiet confession only I needed to hear. It was the first piece I created that wasn't meant to be seen, and that made it my favorite. David kept leaving books by my stool in the studio. Philosophy, poetry, essays on memory. He never asked if I liked them, never asked for my opinion. He just offered pages the way you offer tea. Gently, freely, without demand. One of the books had a passage underlined in pencil. Letting go is not forgetting. It's choosing freedom over familiarity. I read that line 5 times. Then I put the book down, went back to my rented room, and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. To Ethan. Dear Ethan, this isn't a plea. This isn't a scream. It's not even a goodbye. It's just the echo of everything I never got to say. I loved you. Quietly. Faithfully. Completely. You didn't owe me love in return. But I hoped naively maybe that one day you'd look back and see what was always behind you. Instead you looked ahead. And I wasn't there. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired. So this is not me leaving you. It's me returning to myself. You don't have to respond. You don't have to remember. But if you ever wonder, I did walk away. And I never looked back. Leah. I folded the letter. Slipped it into an envelope. Wrote his name on the front. Then tore it into 4 pieces and burned it in the metal tray by my window. The smoke smelled like ink and endings. And it didn't hurt. Not like I thought it would. Later that week I sold my first painting. Not the girl by the sea, that stayed hidden. But another one. A canvas full of chaos. Crimson skies, broken waves, a shattered boat in the distance. A couple from the city had wandered into the studio and stopped in front of it. They asked what it meant. I told them. The moment before someone chooses peace. They bought it immediately. Paid in cash. Didn't negotiate. As they left, the woman turned to me and said, "There's something about the way you paint heartbreak. It feels like healing." I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded and said, "Maybe it's because I finally stopped waiting for someone to fix it." That night I walked to the edge of the shore. The tide was low, the air thick with salt. I thought about all the ways I had once tried to make Ethan love me, all the things I did without asking for anything in return, all the silent pain I wore like jewelry. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the necklace he had given me on my 20th birthday. The one I wore for 6 years straight. The one I once told myself I'd never take off. I kissed the pendant once. Not in longing. In gratitude. Then I tossed it into the sea. The splash was small, but it echoed louder than anything he had ever said to me. Back in my room I pulled out a blank canvas. And for the first time in a decade, I painted without sadness. I painted not to release pain, but to celebrate that I had survived it. The result was messy, unbalanced, chaotic, but it was mine, and I was proud. By my 3rd month in the town, I had fallen into a rhythm that didn't feel borrowed. Mornings were for walking by the sea. Afternoons belonged to my brushes. Evenings were quiet tea, candlelight. Sometimes a visit to David's bookstore to read in the warmth of strangers' pages. My world was finally still. I was no longer holding my breath, waiting for someone to knock. Until the day my old phone buzzed. I had nearly forgotten I kept it turned off, stashed at the bottom of a drawer. I'd only pulled it out to retrieve an old contact from the cloud. A distant cousin, nothing urgent. The moment I turned it on, it vibrated endlessly. 27 missed calls. 4 voicemails. And a message that froze me in place. From Ethan Blake. Leah, please. I need to talk to you. Just once. I know I messed everything up. Please give me a chance to explain.
No timestamps.
But I didn't need them. The urgency in his voice filled every gap between the words. I sat there, staring at the screen like it had turned into a mirror I didn't want to look into. What did he want now? Was the engagement broken? Did his fiancée discover the years I spent orbiting him like a second son? Or maybe he finally saw what he lost. But it didn't matter. Because I had nothing to give him anymore. No more tears. No more waiting. Not even the satisfaction of hearing me say I was done. He'd feel the absence louder than any answer I could give. I powered off the phone and placed it back where it belonged, with things I no longer needed to carry. Later that day, I found a small note taped to my easel in the studio. David's handwriting. You're different when you paint lately. Like you're not bleeding anymore, just building. It made me smile. I didn't tell him about the message. Didn't want Ethan's name breathing into this town. Instead, I painted something wild. A forest of tangled trees, branches bursting from the canvas like thoughts that wouldn't settle. But it wasn't chaotic. It was alive. That night, David invited me to his apartment for the first time. It was above the bookstore, lined with shelves and postcards from all over the world. We ate noodles out of mismatched bowls, feet tucked beneath us like kids at a sleepover. At one point he asked softly, "Do you believe people can change?" I looked at him. Some. Not all. He nodded. And the ones who don't? They stay stuck in the version of you that needed them. He didn't press. Just handed me a small ceramic fox from his shelf. For luck, he said. Why a fox? They're clever. They survive winters. I took it home and placed it beside my window, next to the brush jar, next to the journal filled with pages Ethan would never read. It wasn't love what I felt for David. Not yet. But it was the first time I didn't flinch when someone stepped into my quiet. The first time I let someone close without needing them to fill a void. And that meant something. I dreamed of Ethan that night. Not the real him, but the version I used to love. The one with soft eyes and gentle smiles. The one I invented between lines he never said and gestures he never made. In the dream, I handed him my favorite painting, The Girl by the Sea. He looked at it, then at me. "I never saw you," he whispered. And I said, "I know." When I woke, my eyes were dry. The dream didn't haunt me. It released me. And by morning, I knew with certainty. He could call 100 more times. But I'd never pick up again. Because now I had a different kind of peace. The kind I didn't need to explain. It was a rainy Thursday when the gallery called. The local art center was hosting a spring showcase. And they wanted to include 5 of my paintings. No application. No portfolio review. Just an invitation. They said my work had emotional clarity. Said people who saw it felt things they couldn't name. I didn't know how to respond. So I said yes. Not because I wanted recognition, but because, after years of waiting for one man to see me, I was finally being seen by strangers for what I created. Not what I gave. Not what I sacrificed. But what I made. I spent the next few days preparing. David helped me carry canvases from the studio to the gallery space. He never asked about what each piece meant. But he treated every painting like it mattered. "You know," he said, carefully wrapping the forest scene. "You paint grief like it grew into something beautiful." I smiled. Maybe that's what it did. The opening night came with little fanfare. No red carpet.
No flashing cameras.
Just soft lighting, murmured conversations, and the smell of fresh paint in the air. When I stood beside my display, I saw people pause, tilt their heads, step closer. And for the first time, I wasn't nervous. Because I wasn't showing them wounds. I was showing them recovery. Halfway through the evening, I stepped outside for air. It had started to drizzle again, soft like whispers. David followed a few minutes later, holding 2 paper cups of warm tea. "To new chapters," he said. I raised my cup. "To ones that aren't written for someone else." We clinked. And it felt like something small and real had settled between us. Not a beginning. Not yet. But a promise that one could exist. The next morning, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was short. "I saw your work. It was powerful. I didn't know you had that inside you.
I'm sorry. OE.
Just an initial. But I knew. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then quietly deleted it. No reply. Because I no longer needed Ethan's words to validate me. He was a chapter. One I had memorized too many times. One I didn't need to revisit. I began writing letters again. Not to anyone. Just thoughts. Pages filled with moments that weren't heavy anymore. Like the time I laughed so hard at David's impersonation of a fussy customer that tea spilled out my nose. Or how it felt when I finally painted a sunrise without any gray in it. I wasn't writing to be heard. I was writing because my voice had returned. One afternoon, I walked by the shore and saw a little girl collecting shells. She was wearing a red jacket, yellow boots too big for her. Her mother called out, and the girl turned, waving both hands wildly. And it hit me. That was the kind of love I used to want. All-consuming. Loud. Impossible to ignore. But what I had now was different. It was quiet. It didn't chase. It stood still and let things arrive when they were ready. When I got home that night, I hung the girl by the sea painting above my bed. It didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a landmark. A reminder of where I had been. And how far I had come. I wasn't running from Ethan. I was simply walking toward myself. I didn't mark the 1-year anniversary of the day I walked away from Ethan. There was no calendar alert. No internal bell. But one morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about him in over a week. Not in memory. Not in comparison. Not in sadness. He had become background. Like an old radio station that once played everywhere, but now barely hummed through the walls. And that realization made me smile. Because healing, it turned out, wasn't a parade. It was a soft, silent shift. A space you suddenly had because something heavy had finally left without saying goodbye. David and I had grown closer slowly. He didn't ask for more. He didn't name what we were. But he showed up. He walked me home when it got too dark. Remembered my favorite fruit. Left wildflowers by my canvas on hard days. He wasn't a lightning bolt. He was a warm light in a room I thought would always stay cold. And somehow that mattered more. One evening we cooked dinner together in my little apartment. Pasta. Garlic bread. A salad I barely touched because we kept laughing between bites. After we cleaned up, he sat on the floor, leaning against the window. I used to think love had to hurt, I said suddenly. David looked up. That the deeper it hurt, the more real it was. He nodded slowly. And now I think love feels like this, I said. Safe. Honest. Light. He didn't speak for a moment. Then I hope I keep giving you this kind of love. Even if it's just a little at a time. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took his hand. Not tightly. Not desperately. Just present. Later that night I walked alone to the sea. The waves were high. The wind restless. I sat on the rocks and whispered something to the water. Thank you, Ethan. Not for loving me, but for not loving me. Because if he had, I would have never left. Never wandered. Never healed. And I would have missed this version of myself. The one who no longer begged for crumbs. Because she had learned how to feed herself full meals of joy. The next day a letter arrived. It had no return address. Inside there was a note. Handwritten. I went by your apartment. The neighbor said you were gone. I don't know where you are, but I hope you're okay. I think about you more than I should. If you ever want to talk. There was no phone number.
No embetaschen.
Just words. A part of me read the letter twice. Out of habit. Out of curiosity. But I didn't feel the pull anymore. I folded it. Placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. And let it gather dust. Because I didn't need to reply to ghosts. That evening I painted again. It wasn't the sea. It wasn't a girl waiting. It was a home, quiet, golden, lived in. With 2 teacups on the table. One full. One halfway there. Curtains dancing in the wind. And no shadows in the corners. When David saw it, he said, "It looks like you." I nodded. It finally does. The spring wind carried cherry blossoms down the street like scattered confetti. It was festival season in the town. Children ran with paper lanterns. Musicians played at every other corner. And laughter echoed through every alley. It had been almost a year and a half since I left. Not just left Ethan, but left the version of myself who only existed through someone else's gaze. Now I walked through crowds with easy shoulders, smiled without checking if someone saw, and laughed without needing permission. I had become someone I never knew I could be. Not hardened, but whole. David and I never had a moment.
No dramatic confessions.
No sudden kiss in the rain. We just evolved. One day I woke up, and he was already making coffee in my kitchen. One night I came home late, and he had left a note reminding me to rest. We didn't say, "I love you," but we said everything else. "Call me when you arrive. I saved you the last piece. Don't forget your scarf. It's cold today." Love, I learned, didn't have to shout. Sometimes it just whispers, and somehow that's louder. At the festival, an older woman stopped by my gallery booth. She studied a small canvas of a woman sitting alone on a balcony, face tilted to the sun. "This piece," she said, "feels like forgiveness." I smiled. "It is." She didn't ask for details, just nodded as if she, too, had once forgiven someone who never apologized. That evening, as I was closing up, David arrived with warm sweet buns and 2 bottled teas. He handed me one without a word and sat beside me on the bench. "You look tired," he said. "I'm good tired." He leaned back. "That's the best kind." We sat in companionable silence. Then softly he asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" I didn't pretend not to understand. To the city. To Ethan. To the life I used to think was mine. "No," I said after a breath. "That girl didn't know how to come home to herself. I don't want to be her again." He nodded. Then, "You're not waiting anymore." "No," I said. "I'm living." Later that night I opened my journal, the one I used to write all my fears in. But this time I wrote something else. Not pain, not longing, but a letter of truth. "Dear Leah, you are not the girl who waited. You are the woman who walked, who chose silence over begging, who learned that love is not owed for loyalty, and attention is not affection. You are not defined by who didn't choose you. You are defined by how you finally chose yourself." Me. I closed the book and placed it beside the ceramic fox David gave me. Then I turned out the lights, curled beneath my blanket, and slept the dreamless sleep of someone no longer haunted. Not by what could have been. Not by who never stayed. But by the calm certainty that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of ache. Summer arrived with a slow breath, long days, iced tea, and the hush of cicadas outside the studio windows. By now my art had found its own quiet audience. People came from nearby cities to see The Woman Who Paints Silence. The local newspaper ran a small article. Someone even asked if I'd ever consider publishing my journals. I politely declined, because while I was grateful to be seen, I had grown protective of the peace I found. Some stories I realized were just for surviving, not for sharing. One weekend afternoon, David and I visited a flea market by the bay. Rows of vintage books, jewelry, old clocks ticking softly like they had secrets. I browsed aimlessly, stopping at a stall selling second-hand rings. None of them fit. I tried one, then another. David raised an eyebrow playfully. "Looking for something specific?" I smiled.
No.
"Just curious." The vendor handed me a silver band, simple, unpolished. "It's not perfect," she warned, "but it's honest." I slid it on my finger, and it fit. Not tightly, not symbolically, just comfortably. I didn't buy it, but I kept the feeling. Back at the apartment, I found a message on my new phone from an old mutual friend. "Just so you know, Ethan got married last month." I read it twice, not because it hurt, just because it was strange. Strange how a person who once consumed your every waking thought could become a name in a stranger's update. I didn't ask for photos, didn't wonder what she looked like, didn't try to imagine what version of Ethan he had become. Instead, I closed the message and opened my sketchpad. I drew a room, filled with plants, books, an open window, and a woman sitting barefoot on the floor, smiling without a reason. When David peeked at it later, he said, "She looks free." "She is," I replied. We made dinner together that night. The same pasta from our first shared meal, only now with added herbs and laughter that came easier. After we ate, he turned to me and asked, "Would you ever want to leave this place?" I paused. "Not unless you're coming with me." He smiled. "Then maybe we don't leave at all." We didn't need promises. We already had presents. Before bed, I wrote one last entry in my journal. "Dear Leah, you gave him 10 years. But you gave yourself the rest. You didn't leave empty-handed. You left with clarity, with stillness, with the knowing that you are not a wound. You are a woman, and she deserves soft landings." Me. I closed the journal, and this time I didn't put it beside the fox. I tucked it into a drawer I might never open again, because I didn't need to reread it. I was already living the final chapter. 1 year later, I stood in my gallery alone just before opening. The spring sun filtered in through tall windows, casting soft gold across the paintings on the wall. Each one told a story, but none of them were about Ethan. People asked me sometimes, "Who is the girl in the red scarf? Why are so many windows open in your paintings? Why do all your women look like they've just said goodbye?" I never answered, because the truth was simple. They weren't saying goodbye to someone else. They were saying goodbye to who they used to be, just like I did. David walked in quietly, 2 cups in hand, one for him, one for me. He didn't ask if I was nervous about the exhibit. He didn't remind me how far I'd come. He just said, "I hung your favorite piece near the entrance. It deserves the light." It was the painting of the girl by the sea, her arms out, face calm, no longer waiting. I hadn't planned to include it, but maybe now it no longer hurt to share. Later that evening, a letter arrived. No return address. I knew the handwriting. "I saw a clip of your interview. You look different. Happier. I hope he treats you well. I still remember the scarf." I didn't cry. Didn't smile either. I folded the letter, placed it in the same drawer as the others, and went back to the studio. The world outside still buzzed, but inside I was calm, because I didn't need closure anymore. I didn't need to be remembered. I didn't need him to regret. I had lived my ending, and it was soft, and it was mine. On the canvas that night, I painted nothing. I just sat, brush in hand, watching the light hit the girl in the red scarf. One last time,